You're listening to episode 105, How to Stop Feeding the Monsters in Your Life, with Veronica Loving. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you for joining me for this latest episode of the podcast. I appreciate having you here. And today we're going to be joined by Veronica Loving, author of her memoir, Feeding a Monster. Veronica is going to share her story of overcoming trauma experienced both as a child and as an adult, and how not dealing with her childhood trauma continued to impact her life until one day she made the connection. And in particular, we're going to talk about what happens when we don't understand our value. Veronica is going to share how a traumatic experience that happened to her daughter triggered her to make changes in her own life, the signs and symptoms a woman should look out for to indicate that she is indeed in an abusive situation, what made Veronica decide to go public with her story, what it means to feed a monster, and how writing her book has changed her trajectory in life. Now, while Veronica's story might resonate more with women than with men, I do think that anyone who has unresolved trauma that they're working through can benefit from it, just as Veronica says that her book has touched lots of people who she didn't realize would be touched by it. So, that said, we're going to go ahead and get into this one, and I'm going to go bring Veronica on. Veronica, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I heard about your story, I definitely wanted to have you on the show because you've recently written a memoir called Feeding a Monster about your story, and you speak about identifying the signs and symptoms of physical, verbal, sexual, and emotional abuse. And given that my audience has listeners that have been through different types of abuse, I know that they'll benefit from hearing your story and what's helped you in your healing journey. And while I know that in your memoir, your focus is on what you experienced as an adult, you also experienced some things growing up as well. And so what I'd like to do, Veronica, is, have you kind of start us out with your childhood, if you don't mind, and give us a summary of what you experienced then, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Well, as a child, probably around 3 years old, I was molested by a babysitter, which was a female babysitter, which is unusual. And I think when you're molested as a child, you really don't, it changes the trajectory of your life. You pretty much, you're more sexual, you don't understand the feelings and the things that happen, and you actually are in victim mode. So I think with my situation, I didn't tell my parents because I was 3, and that's not unusual not to tell your parents.
Mm-hmm.
It happened over a course of time, and I think it made me, it lowered my self-esteem. I didn't feel valued, and I think that I felt that I did tell my parents and they didn't protect me, which wasn't a fact, but that is how I felt. And I think it definitely affected me throughout my life.
Yeah. Now, at 3 years old, were you able to really kind of grasp what was happening, or you just have this sense that something isn't right? This isn't how you're supposed to be treated?
Yeah, obviously at 3 you don't know anything about sex, so you don't know what it is. It kind of like penetrates your life and changes you, and you have no idea what that's about. You feel that it's wrong, or at least I felt that it was wrong, but I felt personal shame, which is common, but it's not your shame, but that's how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I'm sure at other ages it's the same thing, especially, but I think even more pertinent when you're not even aware that there is, that this can even happen to you, and it happens. It's more of a shock.
Yeah. And then, so when was the first time that you told someone about it?
I believe I told someone when I was talking to my sister in young adult, maybe in my 20s, and I was telling her what happened, and I was telling her that I felt like mom and dad didn't protect me. And she was saying, I really don't think anybody's ever heard this. So I told my parents about it separately because they were divorced by the time. And, my mom felt bad about it. And my dad, I'm sure he felt bad about it, but nothing was done, and it was water under the bridge. There's nothing you can do now. But I just felt like I should not hold this woman's secret, nor should I protect her, because God knows how many other people she's done it to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can certainly imagine how, that did affect you growing up, as you were saying. And how did that kind of carry over into your adult life? Because I know that you then experienced some trauma then as well.
Yeah, I think that when you're confused and these things happen and they don't get addressed, I think the most important thing is that it wasn't addressed. And it's no one's fault that it wasn't addressed. But when it's not addressed, it's left to fester. So I think it affected my self-esteem, my value as a human, as a woman. I think it affected my sexual, intimacy for sure. I protected and guarded myself, and I didn't understand why. And I really felt the one thing that sticks out for me the most was how I allowed people to treat me. And I allowed I would get really uncomfortable if, flirting. If someone flirted with me, it would make me really uncomfortable and I didn't know how to respond, which is unusual because you should be able to, it should be fun and flirty.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was like it would trigger me back to being 3. And I would act like a 3-year-old. Like I would shy away, kind of run away. And I almost wanted the relationships to skip that part and just be, if we're going to get to the sex, let's just get there.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was too uncomfortable for me, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
later in life, I kind of went back and understood it. But as I was going through it, I had no idea.
Yeah, so you weren't making that connection that the way you were feeling at this time was due to what you had experienced when you were 3.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And when did you?
I was.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask when you started to make that connection.
Oh, I'm glad we were on the same page.
Okay.
I was actually was date raped at 15. And I immediately blamed myself because of what I had on. I tried to be cute. I didn't tell my father the truth, and I went out, to be with this guy. But I thought we were just going to a party. So my intentions were innocent, and his weren't. And instead of me putting the blame or the anger toward the person who attacked me, I flipped it on myself. And that was a habit that I've developed from, the initial molestation, which is a very, very unhealthy habit. So when I was a little older, and I also went out with him again years later, which made no sense to me. And I was so ashamed. I never explained it or told anyone because I didn't understand it. So I was in therapy one day, late. This is after, like in maybe 5 or 6 years ago, not too long ago. And the therapist told me that that's a trigger. So if anybody assaults you again, you don't have the capacity to stand up for yourself because you automatically turn back into a 3-year-old. And then that gave me the opportunity to forgive myself and to understand myself a little better so that I could protect myself if it ever happens again, and I can speak on it and I can understand why I decided to go back out with him, because it was try to get your power back, which makes no logical sense. But now I understand it, and now I can make different decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, I mean, now, tell us a little bit about, what happened to you in your marriage, because I know that's kind of the topic of your book, Feeding a Monster.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the childhood thing at first, because when I first started to write the book, what happened was my ex-husband that I was married to for 22 years, he raped our oldest child. It wasn't his biological child, but he raised her from birth. And I was just tormented and shocked We put him in jail. I realized during the trial that he may get off, which made no sense to me. And I started to think, like, what can I do to, at first it started off as vindictive, like get him back. And then it started off and then I went to saving my daughter who was in turmoil. She was traumatized. She had post-traumatic stress disorder. And I decided to write, and I convinced her to write with me. And that was cathartic and healing for me. And I had to take accountability for myself, for me attracting a man who was a deceptive, lying person who didn't treat me respectfully anyway. I didn't expect him to ever be a rapist or to hurt our children. Never. That was never, ever. He never presented that to me. I never would have expected that to happen. But I did know he lied. I did know he cheated, and I spent so much time trying to fix him and help him be a better person so that we can have a better marriage, when the focus as a woman should have been on me fixing myself and healing myself so that I attract a better person that is more in alignment with who I am, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
in
did
the book,
this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did this happen? What you experienced there with your ex-husband. Was this after you had made or kind of made that connection between, what had happened to you when you were 3 and how you were affected by it?
No, I never addressed it throughout my young adult, my teens, my marriage at all. Okay. I kind of, said it was over and I just swept it under the rug. But it affected me in so many ways because, I think you have to understand your value as a person. And when you don't understand your value, you allow things to happen to you and for people to mistreat you. But when you understand your value, you don't allow certain things to happen to you. Just like you would protect your children, you would protect yourself. And I think that was where the disconnect was. I didn't understand my value, probably because of the first initial trauma that wasn't addressed. And it was like a thread in my life the entire time.
Right. So you don't address it, and then it just keeps coming up and coming up. And
yes.
Yeah, until you can finally make that connection and start to make some changes and heal from it, and realize that that you are worthy and you don't deserve to go through this stuff or to have someone treat you this way.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And definitely things, once you make that connection, once you value yourself and you stop looking for value outside of yourself, then things will just automatically start changing around you. People who, friends, family, people who are used to you being the victim and are used to that dance will either step it up or fall away. And you have to be willing and able to allow that to happen, that process to happen, to let people go. Mm-hmm. In a loving way, you got to let some people go.
Yeah. Now, it must have been so difficult for you to find out about what had happened to your daughter.
It was the most traumatic, traumatizing, horrid thing that I could have thought of, besides someone killing her. That was the next, because it felt like they tried to kill her soul, because this was her father that she loved. And for him to betray me, her, and his other children, and his family, my family, like that was horrifying. And it forced me to make a choice and to change. I was forced into a realm of what are you going to do now? You can either, and I didn't even think that I could accept this. But now that I'm speaking to people across the country, I understand that some people, it's still not their rock bottom. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because they're so damaged. So I'm grateful that I had the courage at that point to stand up and change my circumstances.
Yeah. So, what are some of the signs and symptoms that a woman should look out for to indicate that she is indeed in an abusive situation? Because sometimes if you're coming from that traumatic background, you might not be sure, because you don't know how to stand up for yourself, and so you're not quite sure of what you're going through is acceptable or not, right? So what are some of the things that, that a woman should look for?
That's a great question. I think that, and I think you start with forgiveness because you have to understand yourself. And you really don't understand everything about yourself. You don't understand why you allow certain things to happen to you. So I think one of the things you look out for is how does it feel? Do you feel stressed? Are you feeling burdened? Are you feeling anxiety with the way this person is treating you? And one of the tests I started doing, I have 3 daughters and a son, is I started when my babies were born, I would say to myself, and I would write this in journals all the time. So say my husband stayed out till 3 o'clock in the morning. I would say, if a man did this to my daughter, how would how would I tell her to react, or what advice would I give her? And then I started using that as advice to myself because I don't think I felt worthy, or I understood that it was bad for me. But when you look at it through someone else's eyes, your precious, innocent child, you can say, okay, well, if it's not, I wouldn't allow anybody to do that to her, so I'm not going to allow anybody to do that to me, if that makes sense. And that was like
Mm-hmm.
a exercise that I started doing with myself. And I didn't even know what the answer was. Now that I'm outside of it, I understand. Like you leave or you make a different decision, you protect yourself. But when I was in it, I couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Right.
So my advice would be to be patient with yourself. First and foremost, if it's harmful situation, if you're being physically abused or you're afraid for your life, then you reach out. You reach out to any of the programs, you reach out to the police, you reach out to someone you trust, an adult person that you trust, and you have them walk it through you. You tell the truth. You don't hide the things that you feel ashamed of. You don't hide them from someone you trust, and then you try to use their advice when they tell you, you know what, that's not okay. Then you can say, you know what, she's probably right. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. No, and thank you
Yeah.
for, kind of sharing that advice. I think that's going to be really
Hmm.
helpful. So let's talk a little bit more now about, the things that have helped you to get to where you are today. It
Okay.
sounds like therapy played a part in that. That kind of where things started, I guess.
Yeah, I think that through the years I was preparing, not knowing, because I got really involved in church. I became a practitioner and I would help other people. Um, Through being a nurse, I've learned different techniques of, different signs and symptoms of abuse to look out for other people. So I think in the beginning I was learning to protect and to help other people. And then I could use some of those tools when I realized that I needed those tools. So that was helpful. Prayer was number one and most important, and also surrounding myself with people who actually really cared about me and I knew it and I could trust them. And also therapy. Therapy, I would definitely wish I would have done more. I haven't delved into that as much as I possibly, could have
Mm-hmm.
because of the dynamics in my life. 4 kids, one person working,
Mm-hmm.
all those things. But it definitely was helpful.
Was it just talk therapy?
Yeah, that's all I've done.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. And not as consistent as I would like to have. And I definitely, and writing, for me, writing is an amazing therapy.
Yeah,
And I've done a
writing
lot of writing.
writing is very therapeutic for a lot of people. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
And also like giving back. Like when I help someone else and I hear someone else's story, it helps me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how about, writing your book? Was that therapeutic for you also?
That was cathartic and amazing. I didn't even know that it was going to be that way. And it almost felt like I'm done. I put it down on paper. I don't have to carry these bags anymore. So I think that was probably the biggest shift in my healing
Mm-hmm.
was the book writing and seeing my daughter write and seeing her heal was really amazing.
So were you writing before you started writing for your book? Or was that like the first time that
No,
you started to
I was
write?
writing in my journal. So actually, yes, I was writing in my journals, but I hadn't done any public writing. And, I write poetry and things like that, but just for myself. I haven't shared them with anybody. And when I went to write the book, I pulled out a lot of my journals and just kind of see where I was at certain times in my life. And I think it helped me to write the book. But journaling has been really, really amazing for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what made you, decide to go public with your story?
I think I knew there was a lot of interest in our town, and I was embarrassed, and which, I know I shouldn't have been, but I felt like everywhere I went, people were going to be like, what happened? What happened? And that might have been in my own head, but that's how I felt. Then when I just was praying one day and I got a revelation that you and your daughter need to write, period. And what I kind of pushed on my daughter to kind of help her heal. And when I saw my ex-husband, there's like a lot of dynamics to why. So when I saw my ex-husband getting away with this, I knew that he was going to do it to other people because it wasn't just her. He was actually doing it to many people. I found out throughout the trial. So I felt a sense of responsibility to tell my story. If I can help someone avoid being hurt or raped by him. But then when I finished, I realized that, oh my God, this is something that can help many in so many different aspects of their lives. So we went public, and it's been a blessing since. It's been amazing.
Mm-hmm. The response has been supportive.
Yes, it's been very supportive, and I've gotten a lot of, a lot of people inbox me in my Facebook that, this has changed their lives, and they've been able to, come out with their stories of sexual assault or rape or things that they've carried for so long. They've just released it, and that's what it's all about. When one person throws a stone, and there's a ripple effect, and it affects so many other people. So I'm just grateful that it's a positive effect on others. That's like I couldn't ask for more. I feel so good about it, even though I exposed myself completely. I feel great about it now that it's helping others.
Yeah, no, that's great. And tell us, kind of what the title of your book means, to feed a monster.
Yeah, that came to me because I felt like when I was thinking of my marriage and I was thinking of this man that I loved, what did I do to contribute to this growing of this monster, this obsession, or whatever it is? And I thought, wow, it's not about him per se. It's about the monsters that I fed throughout my life. So when I didn't feel good about myself, I was feeding into low self-esteem. I was feeding, and I lived in denial about a lot of things. So that's feeding, that will grow a huge monster of denial, low self-esteem. It continues to grow. You attract people that are in that same realm and then you feed their ego. I fed his ego with my low self-esteem, and I allowed him to grow. So it's metaphorical. And if you feed good thoughts, if you feed transparency, then that's what you're going to get back. It's transparency, health, good thoughts, good vibration. But when you feed your sadness and you stay in it, then you attract more of it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what that means when you're feeding a monster.
Yeah, that's so true. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Now, who is your book for?
I when I wrote it, my vision was I thought more women, and I thought, especially women who are like, I have a great career, I have a lot going for myself. I was thinking, those are the women who don't usually speak out. But as I've traveled, and that's just the realm I was in thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and I've learned that, oh my God, it's for people with mental illness, post-traumatic stress. It's for men who've been abused, who've never spoken out. It's for fathers to learn certain things that they can present or do better at to help raise better daughters, to make sure that they feel supported and loved. It's for mothers. It's for children. It's actually for everybody now. And I've met almost everybody in so many different realms. I was speaking at one event, and it was for women in entertainment. And what happened was the children, they were like 16-year-olds who were catering the event. They had, they were helping their mom cater the event. 4 of them, they just came up to the stage and just started telling their stories and crying. And, I gave them a copy of the book, and it was just so healing. Mm-hmm. So you never know who you're going to touch. And it's not really my business who I touch. It's just for me to be as transparent, as real as possible, and allow God to reach through me and touch these people. So I think, to sum it all up, it's for anyone who needs it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing that it's, been able to touch so many people's lives. Yeah, it's great. So Veronica, tell us about, how you're doing today, and if there are any sort of lasting effects from what you've gone through that you're still dealing with.
Well, I'm doing pretty well. I think it's made a shift in my life. I thought I was going one way. I was going to actually get my master's and be a midwife in the near future. And I've kind of changed that course right now, because I think that I'm being called to speak and to just get my story out and, touch and help as many people as possible. And I love it. So that's where I am in my life. My children are all grown now. They've all gone through things. I felt guilty at first because I wanted them to have the best of the best. I wanted them to go to 4-year universities and do all these things. And I saw them get damaged, and I felt so guilty. So now I'm letting go of that guilt. I'm trying to be the best adult parent that I can be. They're doing well. They still have struggles, but they have the tools to do better. They're working at it, and it's just amazing watching them blossom. And they're, a few of them have children now. So we're just having a great time. We reorganized our life. It's different, but it's awesome, and we're just taking it one day at a time.
That's great. Yeah. And, tell us about, I know you also have your nonprofit organization, Loving You Through It, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have a nonprofit. It's in the infancy stages, and it's called Loving You Through It. And basically what it is if people reach out to us and they need help. So say you're going through a domestic violence situation. We'll help you. We'll walk with you through court cases. We will be by your side. We'll be an ear for you to call and cry on. We'll remind you of how wonderful you really are. And we just try to keep you centered and focused as you walk through it. And we'll remind you throughout the whole process that this is something you're going through. This is not where you stop and stay. So and we use people who've been through things. So usually it's me. And as the foundation grows, it's going to be more people. And we're going to be able to hopefully be that support as you go through something. Because a lot of times you're alienated when you've, been in your crisis. You've alienated yourself, and you're embarrassed and you're shameful. So hopefully with this program, we can break through some of that and hopefully assist each other as sisters, as friends, and just help you walk through it. We're not a legal organization, so we don't give legal advice, but we're just there as your support.
That's great. No, and I wish you well and everything that you've going on today, and how you're able to help people with going through things similar to what you've gone through yourself. So
thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Veronica, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say the main thing is that you realize that you're not alone, that you can get through this. And I think there's a Bible verse that says, this too shall pass. So if you can hold on to that when you're walking through it, you don't know the answers of what's going to be on the other side, but you're going to get through it. And the shrapnel and all the things that don't serve you will fall by the wayside. And you're going to come out stronger and better, and believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the advice I would give myself.
Yeah, no, I love that. Just believing that, this whatever you're going through will pass, and you're going to get through it. It's so important to to have that faith, that that'll happen. Because
Yeah.
I know it can be a challenge when you're in the middle of it and you're just not sure, when you're going to get through it and if you will. So, it's important to hang on to that belief. And I love having guests on like yourself who, can show us that it is possible, that you've been able to do it for yourself and that there is that light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Veronica, how can people connect with you or, just find out more about what you have going on?
I have a website called veronicaloving.com. You can purchase the book through that website. You can also go on Amazon.com and purchase Feeding a Monster. There may be 2 Feeding a Monsters on there, my original book and then the revised version. I prefer the revised version. And then you can go to Instagram. I am Veronica Loving. And then I have a Facebook. I am Veronica Loving. So like that page and write me notes, read the book, give me reviews. I'd love that. Tell me your story.
All right. That sounds good. So yeah, I hope that those of you listening, if, Veronica's story has resonated with you, definitely check out her book and reach out to her. And yeah, Veronica, just thank you for coming on here today and for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Have a great, blessed day.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 105. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Veronica Loving to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you were able to take something away from Veronica's story that can help you in your own situation. One thing that can definitely be taken away is this idea of feeding a monster. What we feed, we attract, right? Veronica talked about feeding the monsters of low self-esteem and denial growing up and how that affected the people she attracted into her life. We can feed negativity or we can feed positivity, but whatever you feed is going to grow, so be mindful of that. I'll admit that I'm not always good at that myself, but what I try to do is be mindful and be aware, because when we are, then we can make the necessary changes. So I hope that you'll take the time to look at what monsters you might be feeding in your life. And other than that, come back in 2 weeks for the next episode. And just as a couple of reminders to close things out, the first one is for the Patreon campaign I have set up for the show. So if you like what I'm doing here and you want to help support it, you can do that over at thegrassgetsgreener.com/Patreon, Patreon. I have some perks for you over there in return for your support, and your support helps me cover the expenses of doing the show, as well as allow me to do more with it going forward. So feel free to check that out if that sounds interesting to you, and you can find that linked up on the website as well. The second thing is if you're interested in coaching, I do offer that as well. Feel free to reach out to me at melissa@thegrassgetsgreener.com, and we can discuss that if that's something you've been thinking about exploring to help you live the life that you deserve to live. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And, as always, have hope.